The divorce papers were already signed by the time I understood what had actually happened to me. I remember standing outside the courthouse on a Tuesday afternoon in October, the kind of day where the sky can't decide between gray and blue, and realizing I was holding a paper cup of cold coffee I didn't remember buying. My lawyer was talking beside me, something about timelines, something about next steps, but her voice kept sliding away from me like a radio signal losing its frequency. I had survived cancer. I had not survived my marriage. And the strange thing, the thing I keep coming back to, is that for most of those 18 months, I believed both of those things were going to be okay. I believed my body was trying to kill me, and I believed my husband was trying to save me. Only one of those beliefs was correct. But to explain how I finally understood that, I need to go back to the morning my doctor sat across from me with a folder on his desk, and a look on his face I had never seen before. The day Dr. Harmon told me I had cancer, it was raining. I know that's not a remarkable detail. It rains in Portland all the time. But I remember it specifically because I had taken an umbrella from the stand near our front door. The yellow one, Emma's umbrella, Michael called it, because he always bought black ones. And I remember staring at it propped against the wall of the examination room while the doctor talked, thinking, I need to remember to bring that home. As if umbrellas were still the kind of thing I needed to worry about. Stage 2, doctor, Harmon said. Aggressive subtype, we want to begin treatment quickly. I was 42 years old. I had a husband. A home we'd spent 11 years building together. A design firm I had co-founded in my late 20s, which I'd stepped back from years ago to focus on family, but which still carried my name in the original incorporation documents. I sat in that examination room and nodded at things I didn't fully understand. The doctor's words kept arriving in fragments. Treatment plan, response rates, side effects, monitoring closely. At some point I asked, what are the odds? He gave me a number, a real one, not a dismissal, not a reassurance. I appreciated that. I always preferred honesty, even when it cost something. Michael was in the waiting room. When I walked out, he stood up immediately, that instinct of his, always physical, always ready, and he read my face before I said a word. His jaw tightened. His eyes went somewhere private for a second. Then he crossed the room and put his arms around me, and I let myself believe the tightness in his grip was love. Whatever this is, he said quietly into my hair, we handle it together. I held on to that sentence for a long time. I held on to it longer than I should have. The first weeks were the strangest kind of ordinary. We told people carefully in the controlled way you do when you're not ready for the word to travel on its own. Close friends, my sister in Seattle, a few people at the firm who needed to know. Michael told his family. His mother called me and cried in a way that somehow made me feel responsible for comforting her, which was its own particular exhaustion. The treatment began. I won't describe the details of chemotherapy to you because they resist description. I'll say only that there is a kind of tiredness that goes beyond sleep. A cellular tiredness, a bone-deep fatigue that makes the body feel foreign to itself, and that I spent a lot of time in those early months in a particular armchair near our bedroom window, watching the street below, waiting to feel like myself again. Michael drove me to appointments, every Tuesday and Friday without complaint. He held my hand in waiting rooms. He learned how to cook things I could keep down. He researched supplements and printed articles about treatment protocols and left them on the kitchen counter for me, highlighted in yellow. He was the picture of a devoted husband. I told myself during those long, quiet afternoons how lucky I was. I told myself that cancer had given us something in a terrible way, a new seriousness, a clarity about what mattered. I believed it. I was 42 years old and I was fighting for my life, and I believed my husband was fighting alongside me. The first thing I noticed was the charge on our joint account. A hotel stay, downtown, 4 nights. I asked Michael about it while he was making dinner, keeping my voice even, the way you do when you're not sure if you want the answer. He didn't turn around from the stove. Work thing, he said. Took the Hartman clients out for the conference. I mentioned it. He had not mentioned it, but I was tired. I was so profoundly, completely tired. And the food smelled like something I could actually eat, and the treatment had made my short-term memory unreliable in ways that frightened me, and it was possible, wasn't it, that he had told me and I had simply forgot. I let it go. That was my mistake, not the last one, but the first. By the second month of treatment, I had developed a rhythm of absence. Tuesday, Friday, the clinic, the chair, the drive home. I slept heavily and woke slowly, and moved through the house like someone navigating in low light. carefully, conservatively, aware of my own fragility in a way I had never been before. Michael was around less. Work, he said. The Hartman account was demanding, a new client in the Midwest, meetings running long. I had no reason to question this. His work had always expanded into whatever space was available. Before the diagnosis, I'd sometimes joked that the firm was his first wife. He hadn't laughed at that joke as much as I'd expected. But now he came home later, left earlier, kept his phone face down on the table in a way that I cataloged without meaning to, a small observation filed somewhere I didn't examine. The expensive purchases began around week 6. A bottle of perfume left on the bathroom counter. Not mine. I know my own scents. I've been wearing the same two, alternating for 15 years. This one was heavier, floral in a way that sat on the air and didn't dissipate. A gift, Michael said when I held it up. For my assistant, she's been putting in extra hours. I must have grabbed the wrong bag. He took it from me gently and put it in his coat pocket. That night I sat in the armchair by the window for a long time. I was not crying. I want to be clear about that. I was not crying. I was calculating. Because there was something I had learned about myself during those months of treatment. Illness had not made me soft. It had made me precise. When you spend that much time monitoring your own body for signals, tracking what's changing, what's responding, what isn't, you develop a sensitivity to information that is hard to turn off. Something was changing. I didn't have a name for it yet. I was still looking for the right explanation. Our neighbor, Patricia, gave it to me without meaning to. She stopped me on the front walk one afternoon when I'd come home from an appointment, still wearing the gray sweater I lived in during treatment, moving slowly, sunglasses on to manage the light sensitivity. Emma, she touched my arm lightly. How are you feeling? We've been thinking about you. We talked for a few minutes, the easy, careful conversation of neighbors who are friendly without being close. She asked about treatment. I said it was progressing. She said I looked better than she expected. And then, tilting her head slightly, the way people do when they're about to say something casual that is not casual at all. Michael's friend has been coming around quite a bit, hasn't she? I've seen her car a few times, the silver one. She said it pleasantly, as if she assumed I knew. I smiled. I said, yes, we've had a lot of people helping out. I went inside. I stood in the front hallway for a moment with my hand still on the door handle. Michael's friend, she... I had never heard Michael mention a female friend who visited the house. Not once. I went upstairs. I went into the bathroom. I was moving automatically, the way you do when your mind has gone somewhere else entirely, when thought and body have quietly separated. I reached past the towels on the rack. I opened the cabinet below the sink, and there, caught on the edge of the second shelf, was a single strand of hair. Blonde, long, not mine. I'm a brunette. I have been a brunette my entire life. I held that strand of hair between 2 fingers for a long time. And I did not cry. That was the moment I understood something had shifted, not just in my marriage, but in me. The woman who might have cried, who might have confronted him that night over dinner, who might have asked and pleaded and needed, that woman had been slowly replaced. Over months of treatment and exhaustion and fighting just to stay present in her own body, by someone different. Someone quieter, someone who knew how to wait. I set the strand of hair carefully on the edge of the sink. Then I went downstairs, and I started dinner, and I said nothing. And for the first time since the diagnosis, it was not fear that kept me silent. It was something much more useful than fear. I hired the investigator on a Wednesday. His name was Cal Drummond. He had an office above a dry cleaner on Morrison Street, the kind of place that doesn't advertise because it doesn't need to, where the clients find him through quiet referrals and leave without wanting their names remembered. A friend of a friend had used him once years ago during a business dispute. She described him as thorough and discreet, which were the only 2 qualities I required. I sat across from him and told him what I knew. The hotel charge, the perfume, the neighbor's comment, the hair. He listened without writing anything down. When I finished, he asked 3 questions, practical, specific, no editorializing, and then he named a fee and a timeline. I wrote him a check from my personal account, the one Michael didn't have visibility into, the one connected to the company I'd founded, the one I'd kept quietly separate for no reason I could have articulated at the time. I was grateful later for that instinct. I didn't tell Michael I was going to additional appointments that week. He didn't ask. The photographs arrived 11 days later. Cal sent them as a secure file. I opened the folder on my laptop at the kitchen table while Michael was at the office. On a Thursday morning when the light came through the window at a low angle, and made everything look more ordinary than it was. The first few were what I expected. Michael and a woman, younger, early 30s, blonde, at a restaurant I recognized on the east side, close together, his hand on her lower back as they walked to their table, her leaning in to say something that made him smile in a way I had not seen him smile in over a year. I kept scrolling. A hotel downtown. Not the one on the statement, a different one, nicer, her car in the parking structure. Both of them walking through the lobby with the easy, practiced movement of people who had done this many times before. A weekend trip. Photos taken from a distance, the clean compression of a long lens at what looked like a vineyard 2 hours south of the city. They were at a table on an outdoor terrace. There was wine. There was sunlight. She was wearing a dress I didn't recognize, but the bracelet on her wrist was one I did. I had to look at that image for a long time before I understood what I was seeing. The bracelet was gold, delicate, with a small diamond clasp. Michael had given it to me for our 8th anniversary. I had looked for it in my jewelry box 3 weeks ago and assumed I'd misplaced it, the way I'd been misplacing things since the treatment began, keys, words, small objects that slipped out of memory. She was wearing it at a vineyard in the Willamette Valley, on a weekend when Michael had told me he was in Seattle for a client meeting. I closed the laptop. I sat very still for a moment. Then I opened it again because I needed to see all of it. All of it. Not the version I could manage, but the complete version, the one that would tell me exactly what I was dealing with. There was a page of notes from Cal at the end of the file. Dates, locations, a timeline. And at the bottom, a section he had titled simply, Additional. He had attended a dinner party. Michael, not Cal, a dinner party at a home in Lake Oswego, hosted by people whose names I didn't recognize. Cal had obtained the guest list through a contact. Michael had introduced the woman, Vanessa Cole. Cal had identified her as a close friend. But that wasn't the additional part. The additional part was a conversation Cal had overheard at a subsequent event, through means he didn't specify and I didn't ask about. Someone had asked Michael how his wife was doing. Michael had said, "It's a difficult situation, but these things have a way of resolving themselves." These things have a way of resolving themselves. I read that sentence 4 times. I understood exactly what it meant. I was a difficult situation that was in the process of resolving itself. I was the problem that cancer was solving for him. I went back to Cal 2 days later. I asked him to keep watching. I needed to know how far this had gone. Not because I was still hoping I was wrong, that hope had ended the moment I'd seen my bracelet on another woman's wrist, but because I needed the full picture before I made a single move. In my old life, before the diagnosis, I had been known among colleagues for a particular quality. I didn't react to incomplete information. I waited until I had enough. Then I acted decisively and without hesitation. Cancer had not taken that from me. If anything, it had sharpened it. Cal's second report came back 10 days later. This time he included audio. A phone recording, legally obtained. He was careful to note that, from a conversation Michael had apparently had in a restaurant booth, believing the ambient noise made him private. I sat in my car in the clinic parking lot after a treatment appointment and put in my earphones. I heard Michael's voice. Easy, relaxed, the voice he used when he felt completely safe. And I heard him say, to someone whose voice I didn't recognize, a male friend, by the sound of it, "Vanessa's already been over to look at the house. She has ideas about the kitchen. I told her to wait a little longer." A pause. Then, "It's only a matter of time." I took the earphones out. I looked at the windshield for a while. Outside, people were moving through the parking lot in the ordinary way, walking to their cars, checking their phones, living their normal, uncomplicated lives. And I sat among them and understood something with a completeness that I hadn't reached before. This was not a man who had made a mistake and was suffering for it. This was a man who had made a plan. Vanessa had been in my house. She had walked through my rooms. She had evaluated my kitchen. She had stood in the space I had built and chosen wallpaper colors and decided what she would change and what she would keep, the way you do when a property is already yours in everything but paperwork. While I was in that clinic chair, twice a week, fighting to stay alive, while I was counting days and tolerating side effects, and holding on to the version of the future I still believed we were building together. She was measuring my kitchen. I drove home. I made dinner. I said nothing. I heard the conversation I was never meant to hear on a Sunday evening in late November. I had come downstairs for water. Insomnia had been a persistent side effect. The kind that dropped me into sleep at 7 p.m. and woke me at 2 a.m. feeling hollowed out. And the kitchen light was on, and Michael's voice was coming from the living room at a low register, careful and private. I stopped in the hallway. I know the layout of our house in the dark, the way I know my own breathing. I stood against the wall without making a sound. Michael was on the phone. He was saying, "The policy is substantial. Combined with the property and what I've moved into the secondary account, we'd be in a very good position." Silence while the other person spoke. Then, "No, the lawyers are already looking at the company shares. Her original stake is the complicated part, but they think there's a pathway." Another silence. Then, quietly, with the particular flatness of someone stating a fact, rather than expressing an emotion, "We just have to wait." I stood in the hallway for a long time after he hung up. We just have to wait. Not, "I hope she gets better." Not, "I'm terrified of losing her." We just have to wait. He was talking about a life insurance policy. He was talking about property. He was talking about the company's shares, my company, the one I had built, whose founding documents still carried my name, as a complicated part of what he stood to acquire when I was gone. He was not grieving a sick wife. He was managing an estate. I was already dead to him. I had been dead to him for months, probably. The appointments he drove me to, the hand-holding in the waiting rooms, the highlighted articles on the kitchen counter, all of it performed. All of it maintenance. Keep her calm, keep her trusting. Wait for the resolution. I went back upstairs without the water. I lay in the dark and I thought about the 11 years we had spent in that house. The choices I had made. The version of my life I had quietly surrendered in the belief that partnership meant something. I did not cry. I had stopped crying about Michael some time ago, I realized. The grief had moved through me and departed, and what remained in its place was something cooler and more structural. Not rage. Rage was too loud, too consumable. This was quieter. This was architecture. I was going to need a plan. And then my phone rang. It was just past 2:30 in the morning. I looked at the screen. Dr. Harmon's office. The after-hours line, which meant it had been routed from his personal cell. I answered. "Emma." His voice was alert, careful in the way doctors are when they are about to say something that will change the shape of someone's day. "I'm sorry to call at this hour. I wanted to reach you before tomorrow's appointment. We got your latest imaging back this afternoon." I sat up. "The tumor has responded," he said. "Significantly, more than we projected at this stage." He kept talking. I heard words: reduction, response rate, cautious optimism, next steps. But what I heard underneath the words was simpler. I was not dying on Michael's schedule. I stood up slowly and walked to the window. The street below was empty. The neighbor's porch light was on. Somewhere a car passed, headlights sweeping the wet pavement. "Emma," Dr. Harmon said, "are you still there?" "Yes," I said. "I'm here." And for the first time in months, I smiled. Not the careful, maintained smile I had been wearing for Michael's benefit. Something else entirely. Something he had never seen before. Because as of that moment, the situation had changed completely. He was waiting for me to die. I was going to have to disappoint him. I did not tell Michael. Not that night. Not the next morning, when he came downstairs in his usual unhurried way and poured coffee, and asked how I was feeling with the practiced concern of someone who had learned to perform the question without waiting for the answer. "Tired," I said, "same as always." He nodded and looked at his phone. I watched him over the rim of my cup and thought, "You have no idea." That was a new feeling. Unfamiliar but not unpleasant. The particular quiet satisfaction of holding information that someone else desperately needs and doesn't know they need. I had spent months in a position of vulnerability, dependent on doctors and medication, and the goodwill of a man I now understood had none to offer. Knowledge had felt like something that happened to me. Now it felt like something I controlled. Dr. Harmon confirmed the results in person 2 days later. The tumor had shrunk by 40%. The cancer was responding to treatment in a way that placed me, statistically, in a significantly better category than where I had started. He used the word cautious repeatedly, which I understood as a medical habit rather than a genuine reservation. His eyes were telling a different story. The story of a doctor who had delivered enough bad news to recognize when the news was genuinely good. "We'll continue the current protocol," he said. "Monitor closely, but Emma, this is a meaningful response." I asked him a specific question. If my recovery continued at this trajectory, when might I be considered functionally healthy? Able to resume normal activities, normal work, normal life? He estimated 4 to 6 months, pending continued response. 4 to 6 months. I drove home and sat in the driveway for a while, doing the kind of quiet arithmetic that illness teaches you. Not the arithmetic of days and appointments, but the arithmetic of what you will do with time if you get it back. Michael was waiting for me to die. He had, by my estimate, been waiting for approximately 5 months. He had another 4 to 6 months to wait, and I intended to use every one of them. I called my former business partner, Diana Reyes, on a Tuesday afternoon when Michael was at the office. Diana and I had co-founded the firm together 14 years ago, two women in their late 20s with a shared client and a shared conviction that we could do the work better than the agencies we'd been working for. We had been right. By the time I stepped back to focus on family, the firm had 17 employees and a client list that I was quietly proud of. Diana and I had remained close in the way that former business partners do when the business was built on genuine respect rather than convenience, not daily contact, but a warmth that reactivated immediately whenever we spoke. When I told her what was happening, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Tell me what you need." That was Diana. No performance, no drama, just the question that mattered. What I needed was information. Specifically, I needed to understand the current legal standing of my original stake in the company, the founding shares, the intellectual property, the contracts that bore my name. Michael had told someone on that phone call that lawyers were looking at a pathway through my ownership position. I needed to know what pathway he thought he'd found and whether it was real. Diana connected me with the firm's corporate attorney, a meticulous woman named Helen Park who had been with them since the beginning, and who, upon reviewing my original documentation, told me something that made the tightness in my chest loosen for the first time in months. The shares were mine. Unambiguously, structurally, legally mine. Any pathway Michael's lawyers thought they'd identified ran directly into a wall of founding documents, signed agreements, and corporate bylaws that had been drafted specifically to protect original equity holders. Whatever he'd been told wrong, or he'd been told something convenient and hadn't questioned it, because questioning it would have required acknowledging the possibility that I might survive. Helen began preparing documents. I began making calls. I had been away from the professional world for several years, but the relationships I had built didn't require maintenance to remain functional. They required only reactivation. Former clients who had stayed in touch. Colleagues who remembered the work. A small network of people who, when I told them carefully and without melodrama that I was recovering and looking to re-engage, responded with a warmth that surprised me and then didn't. I realized, underestimated what I had built. Michael had not. He had known exactly what I was worth. He had simply assumed it would transfer to him upon my death. The financial picture came together slowly, then all at once, the way these things do. A forensic accountant Helen recommended spent 3 weeks reviewing the joint accounts, and the secondary account Michael had referenced on the phone, the one he'd been quietly moving assets into. The transfers were not subtle once you knew to look for them. He had been moving money for at least 8 months, in amounts small enough to avoid automatic flags but consistent enough to establish a clear pattern. He had been preparing for my death the way you prepare a house for winter. Methodically, practically, without sentiment. I gathered everything, every financial record, every transfer, Cal's photographs and audio. The bracelet, Vanessa had apparently returned it to the house at some point, perhaps sensing the carelessness of wearing it. And I found it on Michael's nightstand one morning, replaced with the careful inattention of someone who assumed I wouldn't notice. I noticed. I added it to the file. By the time Michael announced his relationship publicly, I had been building my case for 11 weeks. He posted a photograph on a Saturday morning. I was in the kitchen when the notification appeared on my phone. We had enough mutual connections that the algorithm considered it relevant to me, which was its own particular absurdity. The photo was taken at a rooftop bar downtown. Michael and Vanessa, close together, the city behind them at golden hour. He was looking at the camera. She was looking at him with the expression of a woman who believes she has already won. The caption read, "Grateful for this one." Within an hour, there were 47 comments. Friends of ours, people who had been to our home, who had eaten at our table, who had known us as a unit for years, wrote things like, "You deserve happiness, and she's beautiful, and it's good to see you smiling again." Not one of them called me. I put my phone face down on the counter and finished my coffee. I felt something that I want to be precise about, because it would be easy to describe as sadness, and it was not sadness. It was closer to the feeling you get when a long-held uncertainty finally resolves, not relief exactly, but the strange calm of no longer having to wonder. I had wondered, in my weaker moments, whether I had misread something, whether the evidence was real but the interpretation was wrong, whether there was a version of Michael I wasn't seeing that explained things differently. There wasn't. He had posted a photograph of his girlfriend on a public platform while his wife was still alive, still legally married to him, still in active cancer treatment. He had done it openly, casually, with a caption about gratitude. The last piece I needed clicked into place. I called Helen that afternoon and told her we were ready to move. Michael's celebration was his idea. He framed it as a business dinner, a gathering for colleagues and clients at a restaurant he'd booked on the West Side, the kind of place with private dining rooms and a sommelier who wore a small pin on his lapel. 20, maybe 25 people. Business contacts, a few friends, the social architecture of a man establishing himself as someone whose life was in order. Vanessa would be there. I knew because Cal was still watching, and because Michael had, in the casual arrogance of someone who believed his wife was too ill and too defeated to be paying attention, mentioned the event on a phone call taken in our own kitchen. Emma won't be there, he'd said. She's not up to it. He was not wrong about that version of me. He was wrong about the current one. I arrived at the restaurant at 7:45, 15 minutes after the event had started, which was intentional. I wanted the room to be settled, the social dynamics established, the introductions already made. I had dressed carefully, not aggressively, not performatively. I wore the charcoal dress I'd bought years ago for a firm anniversary dinner, the one Michael had once told me made me look like someone who knew exactly what she was doing. I had always appreciated that description. A woman from the front desk recognized my name on the reservation. I had called that afternoon and added myself, because the booking had been made on our joint card, and I remained, legally, a party with full access to it. And she walked me toward the private room with the small professional smile of someone who senses that something interesting is about to happen, but has been trained not to acknowledge it. I heard Michael's voice before I reached the door, relaxed, expansive, the voice of a man performing confidence for an audience. I pushed the door open and walked in. The room did not go immediately silent. Silence in a room of 20 people takes a moment to travel. It starts at the point of disruption and moves outward in a wave, person by person, as each one registers what their neighbor has just registered. I watched it move. I saw Michael first. He was mid-sentence, wine glass in hand, facing away from the door. The person he was talking to, a man I recognized as a former client, saw me first, and his expression did a complicated thing that involved his eyebrows and the corners of his mouth. And then Michael followed his gaze and turned around. The sentence stopped. Vanessa was at the far end of the table. She had been mid-laugh, her hand on the arm of the woman beside her. The laugh stopped cleanly, like a sound file cut off, and she went very still. Michael said my name, just my name, Emma, in a register I had never heard from him before, somewhere between a question and a warning. Michael, I said his name the way you say a word you've been carrying in your mouth for a long time and are finally setting down. I hope I'm not interrupting. I was, of course, interrupting everything. I moved to the open chair at the head of the table. The head, not a middle seat, not an apologetic position near the door, and I sat down. And I looked around the room at the faces of people who were trying to understand what was happening. I owe some of you an explanation, I said, and I think a few of you deserve to know some things that you haven't been told. Michael's voice from across the table was controlled in the way that frightened people sound controlled. Emma, this isn't the place. You introduced Vanessa to your business contacts as your future wife, I said. At a dinner party in Lake Oswego 4 months ago, she's been to our home, she's discussed renovations. I paused. While I was in chemotherapy, the room had completed its silence now, all of it. I have documentation of 41 separate asset transfers from our joint accounts to a secondary account you opened without my knowledge. I have records of hotel stays, travel, gifts purchased on joint credit cards. I looked at Vanessa briefly. Including a bracelet you borrowed for a weekend in the Willamette Valley. She said nothing. Her face had gone the particular careful blank of someone running rapid calculations. I spoke with Helen Park, who I believe some of you know. She handles corporate work for a number of firms in this room. The founding shares of the design company I co-built remain in my name and are not subject to any of the estate arrangements that have apparently been discussed. I let that land for a moment. I'm resuming my active role in that company, effective the 1st of the month. Michael said something. I didn't fully register it. The divorce filing was submitted this morning, I said, along with a fraud complaint related to the financial transfers. I have also filed a formal notification with the insurance company regarding the policy that has been a topic of some planning. I stood up. The room was very quiet in the specific way of people who are holding completely still in the hope of not being implicated in something. I wanted to do this here, I said, because some of you attended those dinners where my husband introduced Vanessa as his future wife, and I thought you should know that I was alive for all of them. I looked at Michael once more, just once. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not literally, he was still the same height, the same build. But there was something compressed about him, something that had been subtracted. Vanessa had already picked up her purse. I left the room. I walked through the restaurant and out the front door and stood on the sidewalk in the October air. And I felt not triumph exactly, not the hot satisfaction I might have expected. Something quieter, the feeling of a weight that had been distributed incorrectly, finally balanced. The divorce took 4 months. It would have taken longer if Michael had fought more strategically. But he had spent so long believing. He held all the cards that the discovery that he held almost none left him with limited options and lawyers who kept finding new problems to deliver. The financial transfers were returned. The joint assets were divided according to the founding documents that predated our marriage. The insurance policy was voided pending the fraud investigation. The house sold in February, a number we had once discussed proudly at dinner parties, and the proceeds distributed according to the settlement. Vanessa left him in December. I learned this not because I was watching, but because a mutual acquaintance mentioned it in passing, with the specific, carefully neutral tone of someone who suspects the information will land a particular way. She had apparently reassessed the situation upon discovering that the situation involved a living wife, ongoing litigation, and a significantly reduced projected inheritance. She had not, it seemed, signed up for that version of the future. Michael's professional reputation sustained damage that I had not specifically engineered, but had not prevented. When the details of the asset transfers became known in the circles where these things travel, the response was the one that tends to follow that kind of behavior in professional communities. Quiet, thorough, and lasting. I did not spend much time thinking about him. I had other things to think about. 1 year later, I attended a cancer survivor fundraiser at a hotel downtown. It was a Friday evening in October, the same month everything had collapsed, the same city, the same gray-blue sky through the tall windows. I wore a dress I had bought the previous spring during the months of recovery when buying new clothes had felt like a declaration. I had grown my hair back. I was told more than once that evening, remarkably well. I was remarkably well. I sat at a table with Diana and Helen, and 2 women I had met during treatment. A schoolteacher named Ruth and a former chef named Gloria who laughed at everything and had strong opinions about soup. We ate and talked, and at some point raised a glass to the particular strange luck of being alive. On the drive home, I found myself thinking about the version of me that had sat in that examination room 2 years ago, watching rain streak the window, holding a yellow umbrella and listening to a doctor deliver a number. She had been afraid. She had also been, it turned out, more durable than anyone, including herself, had understood. Michael had spent months engineering a future premised on my absence. He had optimized for a world without me in it. He had not prepared for the alternative. That was the thing about building a plan around someone else's death. It requires them to cooperate. I had decided, somewhere around 2:30 in the morning on a night when the street was empty, and the phone was in my hand, and a doctor was telling me I might live, that I would not be cooperating. The rest, as they say, followed naturally. He prepared for my funeral. I prepared for my comeback. Only one of us was ready for what actually happened. And that, in the end, was the most expensive mistake of his life.